cost 135.
Right, 135.
To the earthbound, there's always been something special about flyers. Up there in their angelic machines, they seem closer to the divine and free of the surly bonds of earth.
What does a flyer think of when he's up there in the sky? Ask any army pilot, and he'll answer with a sigh. While I'm there in the air with my head in the clouds, I think of someone I love. And I know down below she is thinking of me while I am up there above. When the night is clear and the bombardier drops a bomb that's wired for sound, how I yearn to return with my head in the clouds to the one I love on the ground.
To the Army and Navy men on the ground, the Air Corps was the glamour job of the war. Of course, compared to a foxhole or an engine room, anything would seem glamorous.
The Office of War Information presents its director, Elmer Davis, in his weekly report to the American people at home and to America's fighting forces overseas.
We've had another week of air war, the greatest air war that the world has yet seen, and its scale is still increasing. For 6 days and nights, American and British bombers based in England have been steadily pounding northwestern Germany.
Those bombers were being pounded themselves by defending fighters and anti-aircraft fire. Not until the fall of '43, when target areas were showered with metal strips to confuse enemy radar, and when updated P-51 fighters gave the bombers the long-range protection they had been forced to do without, did the raids become more productive, and more flyers make it back alive.
Yes, we really hit our target for tonight. How we sing as we lift through the air. Look below, there's our field over there. With our full crew aboard and our trust in the Lord, we're coming in on a wing and a prayer. Coming in on a wing and a prayer.
Pilot to crew. Fasten your safety belts. Might be a rough landing.
All set, sir.
All set for landing. Give me full flaps.
Flaps coming down.
Moviegoers in 1943 got a fair idea of the perils of war in the air from Howard Hawks' Air Force, a fictional but realistic account of one B-17 crew fighting its way across the Pacific.
Lights. Airspeed 110. 100.
And the Mary Ann was landed safely. Rare was the B-17 that didn't have a name painted on its nose. Names like Belle of the Brawl, Pistol Packin' Mama, or Grin and Bear It, which is what the pretty girls painted next to the names invariably did. Those painted pinups didn't look much like those girls at home who built the bombers in their overalls, work shoes, and welder's masks. But the wings of the American Eagle were an alloy of steel and gossamer.
Ready on all main engines.
In 1943, Hollywood sent some of its biggest stars to its backlot oceans in praise of the Navy. In Destination Tokyo, Cary Grant played the skipper of the U.S. submarine Copperfin.
In addition to mines, there's certainly a submarine net ahead, just waiting for screwballs like us. Stand by. Keep on your toes. Soundman?
The real-life mission of the Copperfin in 1942 was to sneak into Tokyo's waters and gather information for the Doolittle bombing raid.
Overhead 2/3, steady as you go. Overhead 2/3, steady as you go, sir.
Delmar Davis, in his debut as a director, was so careful with technical details that the Navy used Destination Tokyo as a training film.
Attention all hands. That bottom you're feeling is well inside Tokyo Bay.
September 1943. The Allies invade Italy at Salerno. Overconfidence, poor planning, and powerful resistance by battle-disciplined German forces cause a chaotic pileup of men and equipment on the beach. Navy destroyers dash in close to shore through heavily mined waters, bombard enemy positions, and give the beachhead the cover and time needed to get itself untangled. Brigadier General John Lang of the 36th Artillery Division sends a message that's relayed to all ships. Thank God for the fire of the Blue Belly Navy. Probably could not have stuck it out otherwise on the beaches. Brave fellows these. Tell them so.
We'll return to the home front in a moment.
My fellow Americans, over a year and a half ago, I said this to the Congress. The militarists in Berlin and Rome and Tokyo started this war, but the massed, angered forces of common humanity will finish it. I think the first crack in the axis has come. The criminal, corrupt, fascist regime in Italy is going to pieces.
President Roosevelt, July 1943. The Italian government, trying to avoid more war on its soil, deposed Benito Mussolini and surrendered to the Allies in September. But the Germans in Italy disarmed Italian units, seized control of Rome, and dug in across the Apennine Mountains, Italy's backbone, a natural fortress where a single rifle squad carting its ammo on one pack mule could hold off a battalion. There were no grand strategies now. For the men fighting under Generals Mark Clark and George Patton and Britain's Field Marshal Montgomery, it was war a moment at a time, a yard at a time. It was war fought by dirty, sweaty, cold, tired, and cursing men. War fought by combat's beast of burden, the foot soldier.
Now came the time, as it comes in every war, the greatest fighting machine of them all, the infantry soldier, had to go in and slug it out.
Burgess Meredith as journalist Ernie Pyle in the William Wellman film The Story of G.I. Joe. Ernie Pyle won a Pulitzer Prize for his reporting on the Italian campaign, but more important, he won the respect of the GIs with whom he shared stale, cold coffee and muddy holes in the ground.
Well, it's a world the other world never known. Even the Air Force. Up there, they approach death differently. When they die, they're clean-shaven, well-fed. If that's any comfort. But the GI, well, he lives so miserably, and he dies so miserably.
This was the miserable existence that Ernie Pyle wrote about. It was the grim and bizarre existence that Bill Malden sketched into the sad and comic cartoon figures of Willie and Joe up front. It was the kind of internal war that James Jones wrote about, when men drive themselves to keep going. Maybe, he said, they do it out of professionalism or pride or even patriotism. Or maybe it's because they just reach a point where they don't give a damn anymore.
Lieutenant General George Smith Patton, Jr., commander of the U.S. 7th Army, had still another name, Old Blood and Guts. He knew tanks, tactics, military history, and military discipline. He'd fought Germans before under General Blackjack Pershing in World War I. Patton paid a visit to an evacuation hospital, a tent where a dozen new casualties had just been brought. And there on a cot was a soldier with no visible wounds, still in battle dress, sent back with what a medical officer had called a severe case of psychoneurosis. "It's my nerves," said the young man. Patton exploded, called the soldier a coward, a disgrace to the Army, and then he slapped him in the face. To the medical officer, he said, "I want this man out of here. I won't have these brave boys seeing such a bastard babied." As Patton left the tent, the soldier began to sob. The general returned and struck him again. Minutes later, in another tent, Patton himself broke down and wept openly. What Old Blood and Guts didn't know was that the shell-shocked artilleryman was no malingerer. He'd enlisted at the age of 18, fought in both Tunisia and Sicily, and the psychiatric diagnosis turned out to be incomplete. The young man was running a high fever, suffering from malaria. And before Patton walked into that tent, the soldier had asked the medical officers to let him go back to the front.
For some men, the Italian campaign offered a chance for redemption in the eyes of those watching the war from the safe boundaries of the United States. Early in 1943, the Army began accepting young Japanese Americans whose families had been interned in the U.S. as loyalty risks. The 442nd Infantry, consisting entirely of Nisei volunteers, was a crack unit that saw some of the worst fighting in Italy, suffered the highest casualty rate, and won the most combat decorations. Thousands of them. These Japanese American GIs hoped that by their blood, the barbed wire camp gates would open for their families back home in the States. The gates remained locked.
All the foot soldiers in Italy plodded on from the mud of autumn's rains through the bone-chilling snows of winter, one of the worst Italian winters in memory. In the spring, when the ice melted and Rome was liberated, many of them would just keep going into another campaign, another battle. Ernie Pyle would go on to the Pacific, where he shared with GIs there stale coffee, muddy holes in the ground, and sudden death. Ernie Pyle was killed by a sniper.
That is our war, and we will carry it with us as we go from one battleground to another until it's all over. We will win. I hope we can rejoice with victory, but humbly. That all together we will try out of the memory of our anguish to reassemble our broken world into a pattern so firm and so fair that another great war can never again be possible. And for those beneath the wooden crosses, there is nothing we can do except perhaps to pause and murmur, "Thanks, pal. Thanks."
One day in 1943, people waited on the platform of the station in Philadelphia. There was an atmosphere of tension, anticipation, uncertainty. They were waiting for Army Private Al Schmidt, who a few short days ago lay in a military hospital bed in San Diego. He'd been sent home from the Pacific, blinded, after single-handedly machine gunning 200 enemy soldiers. In his own darkness, he dictated a letter to a nurse to be sent to his fiancée back in Philadelphia, breaking off their engagement for reasons he felt were obvious. The letter began, "Dear Ruth," and it ended with a P.S., added secretly by the nurse. "Ruth," it said, "with his intelligence, personality, and humor, there's no reason why you can't build something pretty fine out of life." Now, some weeks later, when Private Schmidt was helped off the train in Philadelphia, he couldn't see the tears in the eyes of his parents standing there on the platform with his friends and relatives, nor the tears in the eyes of Ruth Hartley, who thereupon announced the wedding plans.
To prove that I love you, I swear I don't know how.
about our next program on the home front in a moment. 1944. On the battlefronts, it's D-Day at Normandy, on Guam, and in Leyte Gulf. Rome falls, Bastogne does not. Douglas MacArthur goes back to the Philippines, and Charles de Gaulle comes home to Paris. And on the home front, confidence soars, victory gardens go to seed, and bets on quick victory are lost. In politics, FDR runs with a fellow named Harry, and Tom Dewey has to run against a pooch named Fallon. 1944, a year of trial and liberation. Next, on the home front. For Edward Brown and Frank Goren, this is William B. Williams. So long, world. Hello, world. This is William B. Williams, and this is the home front.
When the lights go on again, all over the world, and the boys are home again, all over the world, and rain or snow is all that may fall from the skies above. A kiss won't mean goodbye, but hello to love.
Americans had listened to Vaughn Monroe sing that song for 2 years before a few lights did come on in a blacked-out world. They were the lights on transport ships headed for Normandy in France, and what General Eisenhower called the Great Crusade. They were the lights of Paris, which shone in 1944 for the first time in 4 years on a French flag that didn't have a swastika flying beside it. The light was turned on in the torch held by the statue of Miss Liberty, reflecting on the waters of New York Harbor for the first time since Pearl Harbor and brightening many hearts. There were other bright lights in 1944, the fires of battle on Saipan and Guam, in the Philippine Sea and Leyte Gulf. The flash of artillery fire and parachute flares lighting up a besieged American garrison at Bastogne in Belgium on the eve of Christmas. Glaring reminders that victory, however certain, had not lowered its cost. In a moment, along with my colleagues Frank Goren and Edward Brown, we'll be back on the home front and see those lights of 1944.
When the lights go
presenting in person and in the spotlight, Sammy Kaye.
In 1944, American entertainers took their soldier shows to military bases in the United States and to outposts overseas. They brought music, laughs, pretty girls, and the message that the nation was behind the guys all the way, that the GI's wish was the home front's command.
And here's a bit of advice for all the girls from lovely Nancy Norman.
You can't say no to a soldier, a sailor, or a handsome Marine. No, you can't say no if he wants to dance. If he's gonna fight, he's got a right to romance. So get out your lipstick and powder. Be beautiful and dutiful too. If he's not your type, then it's still okay. You can always kiss him in a sisterly way. Oh, you can't say no. No, you gotta give in if you want him to win for you.
GIs certainly liked the idea of the right to romance being part of their Bill of Rights, but many of them were in places where that right couldn't be exercised. And they were constantly reminded of that by Japan's sassy radio propagandist, Tokyo Rose.
Hello, you fighting orphans of the Pacific. How's strict? Reception okay? Well, it better be, because this is all request night. And guess what? He wants Bonnie Baker. Say you want to see me every night, but every time you see me, you want to hold me tight. I ought to say no, unless you let me go. Oh, but my resistance is low.
The women who played the roles of Tokyo Rose and Axis Sally, her counterpart on German radio, tried to get at the GIs where they might be most vulnerable, to get them worried about who was romancing whom back there on that high living home front. Most of the guys enjoyed the music and ignored the message, but they were aware of the good times at home, and many resented it, or just wanted to get back to it.
I ought to say no, unless you let me go. Oh, but my resistance is so low.
What Americans couldn't resist in 1944 was an optimistic sense of change, a sense of older things passing away and new possibilities taking shape. And that sense of the future at hand seemed confirmed by every encouraging word on radio that the war was being won.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. My friends, yesterday, on June 4th, 1944, Rome fell to American and Allied troops. The first of the Axis capitals is now in our hands. 1 up and 2 to go.
People were making bets that it would be all over by Labor Day. Defense workers by the thousands were being lured away from war plants into a booming civilian economy, convinced that war plants would soon be closing. Uncle Sam got worried.
Friends, American men and women are doing a lot, but they can and must do more to help shorten the war. More than ever, it's important and imperative that every one of us stick to his war-useful job in spite of real and aggravating obstacles. That's our way of licking the Axis if we can't shoulder arms.
But the war plan exodus continued.
Last year, we raised 6 million acres of soybeans. This year, they're asking us to boost that figure to 9 million to get more oil to take the place of imports.
They say we need 7% more milk than we produced last year.
We produced more eggs than ever before last year, but this year we want 400 million dozen more.
We're going to send 10 million more hogs to market.
American farmers did produce more in '44, but weeds were growing in millions of backyard victory gardens. It seemed that only teenagers and children were still gung-ho about scrap drives.
Our boys are still fighting. Are you still saving used fat? It's urgently needed to help make battlefront and homefront supplies.
Are you saving old newspapers, magazines, paper bags, and boxes? Paper is a vital war material, and there's a serious shortage. Sell your waste paper.
In almost every month of 1944, scrap drives fell far below quotas as appeals for sacrifice lost their grip on the American conscience. From the time of Pearl Harbor, the government had used every conceivable psychological approach to stoke up the war effort. In the beginning, anger and outrage were enough. And then the element of fear as the war went badly.
Just tell your boss to deduct 10 cents from every dollar he pays you and lend it to Uncle Sam in your name. Sign up for this simple savings plan today, and when victory comes, you'll have war bonds in your pockets instead of Axis bonds on your wrists.
When things began to look up, the message could be carried by laughter.
Hello, Dad.
Oh, George, I have the most exciting news. Guess what? My brother Willie's in the Army.
Well, if everybody buckles down to their jobs, I think we can win the war anyway.
And there was guilt.
Faster, Kelly, faster.
I'm getting all the speed out of her I can, sir.
We ought to reach the destroyer in 5 or 6 minutes now if she can stand up under those Jap shore guns.
Now they're throwing everything they've got at her. If only we had another destroyer, something to double our fire and divide theirs.
I know, Kelly, I know, but we haven't.
Big names like Humphrey Bogart starred in radio dramas that linked the deaths of men in combat with the failure of workers on the home front to work hard enough.
Was it my fault? Didn't I get the shore party over fast enough?
That wasn't your fault, Jessup. The luck of the draw. Now we sit here quietly and take what's coming to us.
If metals are not mined and smelted quickly enough and in large quantities, then ships cannot be sent out on schedule. Then men may die defeated when they should live and win.
American workers did not feel guilty. They had turned out a surplus of war material. And although this sense of satisfaction was occurring just before the worst of the combat casualties would be suffered, an event in June 1944 made people more confident than ever that the war would soon be over. D-Day, the Allied invasion of Europe under the command of General Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, you are about to embark upon the great crusade toward which we have striven these many months. The eyes of the world are upon you. The hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. Your task will not be an easy one, but this is the year 1944. The United Nations have inflicted upon the Germans great defeats. Our home front have given us an overwhelming superiority in weapons and munitions of war. The tide has turned. I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory.
We'll return to the home front in a moment.
My fellow Americans, last night when I spoke with you about the fall of Rome, I knew at that moment that troops of the United States and our allies were crossing the Channel in another and greater operation. It has come to pass with success thus far.
D-Day begins in darkness with the lifting of paratroopers over the English Channel to Normandy in France.
Down the runway, level and straight. Now I can see her white tail light. She goes away over the brow of the hill before she lifts into the night sky. And the second machine is following without a break.
On the Channel, the bows of more than 1,000 Allied ships aim at Normandy's beaches. Those are British Tommies. Under General Miles Dempsey, they will land with Canadian troops at beaches codenamed Juno, Sword, and Gold. General Omar Bradley's American forces will land at beaches called Omaha and Utah. For 2,500 of these men, this week in June will be the last days of their lives. German communications flash an alarm. Enemy paratroopers seem to be everywhere. Field Marshal von Rundstedt suspects it's a decoy. Eisenhower, he believes, will attack in force at the other end of the channel, not at Normandy, and not in weather as unfavorable as this.
This is Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force. In a moment you will hear the Supreme Commander, General Dwight D. Eisenhower.
People of Western Europe. A landing was made this morning on the coast of France by troops of the Allied Expeditionary Force. The hour of your liberation is approaching.
8 Allied divisions under the overall command of Field Marshal Montgomery go ashore in the first wave. But Hitler isn't convinced that this is the real thing. He refuses to commit his reserves and goes back to bed. The Fuhrer sleeps until 3 p.m. while his Atlantic wall is being breached and while the Luftwaffe is being driven from the skies.
Here we go again. Another plane's come over. Right over our port side. Here we go. They got one. They got one. We got that one. This gun right here. Did we? Yeah.
George Hicks off the Normandy coast.
The lights of that burning Nazi plane are just twinkling now in the sea and going out.
As June 6th ended, more than 150,000 Allied soldiers were on French soil, and 1 million more would follow within the month. Von Rundstedt urged Hitler to end the war and was fired from his command. Rommel then decided that he must do something to save Germany. He decided that Hitler would have to be removed. Radio carried the voices of the BBC chorus and the voices of leaders of occupied countries, broadcasting the news of D-Day to their countrymen. In Norway,
Landsmenn, som led i den store strategiske plan.
In Belgium,
Mes chers compatriotes, les opérations préliminaires pour la libération de
in
l'Europe.
Poland,
Żołnierze, lotnicy, marynarze Polacy. Wkraczamy w decydującą
and in
fazę
France
generalnej rozgrywki.
by Charles de Gaulle.
La bataille suprême est engagée. Après tant de combats, de fureur, de douleur, voici venu le choc décisif.
Charles de Gaulle was among the few French military commanders who put up a die-hard resistance to the German invasion of 1940 and was among the last to concede defeat. He escaped to London and through radio declared himself to be the voice and spirit of free France. To his countrymen, he was. But Churchill had little sympathy for France, and Roosevelt never took seriously de Gaulle's pretensions as France's once and future leader. But as the self-proclaimed embodiment of French glory, Charles de Gaulle would not be denied. His hour would come.
When word of the D-Day invasion reached the United States, a great noise went up. Surely the end of the war was now in sight. But the clamor of celebration gave way to a sober mood of reflection. President Roosevelt was heard on radio that night of June 6th, not with a pep talk, but with a prayer.
Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity. And for us at home, help us, Almighty God, to rededicate ourselves in renewed faith in Thee in this hour of great sacrifice.
Americans prayed. They visited blood banks. They bought more war bonds, ended strikes, reduced absenteeism in the factories, and began volunteering again. They hadn't been coaxed into a new resolve by hard sell or soft sell propaganda. D-Day, in its success and with its sacrifice, had just made things clear again.
Achtung, Achtung. From the Führer's headquarters, we shall broadcast an address by the Führer to the German nation.
No one was more surprised to hear that on the night of July 20th than the high-ranking German officers who thought they had killed Hitler with a time bomb earlier that day at his headquarters in East Prussia. But the conspirators were too cautious. They waited for confirmation that Hitler was dead. And by then it was too late to seize the levers of power. There were mass arrests, trials, confessions, executions. Someone mentioned Rommel's name. He was allowed to take poison.
Therefore, every German, whoever he may be, has the duty to counter these elements at once and with ruthless determination, and either to arrest them at once, or should they offer resistance anywhere, to wipe them out at once.
The purge continued, and as the Third Reich consumed itself, Allied armies were driving across France and pushing Hitler's troops toward the Rhine.
We'll return to the home front in a moment.
Ladies and gentlemen of the convention, it is my privilege to present to you the next President of the United States, Thomas E. Dewey.
Thomas Edmund Dewey, age 42, New York's governor, former crime-fighting prosecutor, chosen by the Grand Old Party in 1944 to prevent Franklin Roosevelt from serving 16 years in office.
This election will bring an end to one-man government in America.
The GOP campaign began on that note, with the huge unseen presence of FDR right there in the convention hall. Dewey on the subject of the war.
Let me make it crystal clear that a change of administration next January cannot and will not involve any change in the military conduct of the war.
And on the New Deal's management of the nation, its people, and its money.
All they tell us is that in its young days, it did some good things. That we freely grant. But now it has grown old in office.
Old in office. Roosevelt was 62 by the calendar, overworked, underweight, suffering from high blood pressure, and in the spring of '44, battling bronchitis along with 2 wars and a political challenge.
In Washington, as you know, the working day of the presidency in these times averages about 15 hours. And even when I go to Hyde Park or to Warm Springs, the White House office, the callers, the visitors, and the telephone all follow me.
A visitor to the White House described the president's appearance as wasted. And even when Democrats like John Sparkman of Alabama defended a 4th term as crucial to the war effort, they sometimes gave health issue ammunition to the GOP.
This is not an honor that we seek to bestow on Mr. Roosevelt. It is a job, a terrible, life-taking job.
When the Democrats gathered for their convention, they were united behind the president, but not the vice president, Henry Wallace. The rank and file liked Wallace, but to party leaders he was abrasive, too far to the left, and too easy a target for the Republicans. FDR himself seemed disinterested in the matter. In fact, when the convention began, he was watching Marine training maneuvers on the West Coast. The National Committee had been looking for a perfect compromise candidate who would offend neither the Southern conservatives nor the big city machines. And they found just the right man, a loyalist from a border state, a hard-working senator who had done a good job as a watchdog on the war effort, Harry S. Truman of Missouri.
Upon being nominated for the office of Vice President of the United States, my first wish was to express my appreciation to the membership of the Democratic Party. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is my leader and commander-in-chief.
No one was more flabbergasted by this turn of events than Truman himself. He never dreamed of running and had supported War Mobilization Director Jimmy Burns for the nomination. "My God," said Truman when he was told of the leadership's choice. Only when FDR confirmed it for him personally on the telephone did Truman believe it. And then he said, "Well, why the hell didn't he tell me that in the first place?" With the issue of the president's health playing so prominent a part in the campaign, Republicans disparaged Truman's fitness to occupy the Oval Office, if it should come to that. FDR met the health issue by campaigning harder than ever. He traveled more, drove through the fall's cold rains in an open car without a hat, and stepped up his schedule of speeches.
You know, I am actually 4 years older, which is a fact that seems to annoy some people.
September 1944.
These Republican leaders have not been content with attacks on me, or on my wife, or on my sons. They now include my little dog, Falla. You know, Falla's Scotch. And being a Scotty, as soon as he learned that the Republican fiction writers had concocted a story that I'd left him behind on an Aleutian island and had sent a destroyer back to find him at a cost to the taxpayers of $2 or $3 or $8 or $20 million, his Scotch soul was furious.
Roosevelt's dog got Dewey's goat, and the GOP counterattacked with charges that FDR was too chummy with Joseph Stalin and unmindful about the communist threat, that he had allowed Pearl Harbor to happen to end unemployment. The gap in the polls all but vanished. Late on election night, FDR's neighbors in Hyde Park gathered at his back porch to announce his election victory with their applause. He had swamped Dewey in the electoral vote, but the great popular vote margins of the old Depression campaigns had shrunk to 3 million, as his own once robust figure had shrunk to a size smaller than his suits, as the life remaining within him had waned to one last winter and a moment of spring. Everything was wasting away except his will to go on, to see the war effort through, to be there when peace came.
And so, my friends, with that affirmation of the vitality of democratic government behind us, that demonstration of its resilience and its capacity for decision and for action, with that knowledge of our own strength and power, we move forward with God's help to the greatest epoch of free achievement by free men that the world has ever known.
We'll return to the home front in a moment.
They say that in camp you can have a swell time. We've heard it all before. 5 in the morning we're kicked out of bed to scrub up the barrack room floor. A private has really no privacy now. We're all behind the 8 ball. No ice cream or cookies for flat-footed rookies. So cheer up, my life, lesson more. Heavyweight, underweight, big or small. When you're in camp, bless them all.
There were at least a few American Marines singing "Bless Them All" as their landing craft approached the beach on Guam Island. The source of that information, a man who was there.
This is July 21st, 1944, 6 o'clock in the morning. American Marines are this morning landing on Guam Island in the Marianas, liberating territory seized by the Japanese fascists 2.5 years ago. And this is Sergeant Alvin M. Josephi, a United States Marine Corps combat correspondent, speaking from the scene of this new action. In a few moments, Marines will begin streaming down the side.
Sergeant Josephi was two people that day. Reporter Josephi was detached from the action as though immune to bullets.
There's all hell to pay directly ahead of us. The beach looks as though it's practically on fire. Some of the fellows are beginning to sing here. Bless them all. They're cracking jokes with each other, I guess, to hide their nervousness. There go American dive bombers going down on the beach. back of the beach. Coconut trees along the beach are shattered, looking like burnt telephone poles.
But Alvin Josephi was also a Marine, and those were friends, not strangers, with whom he would face the enemy's guns.
One boy been hurt now right next to us here. He's trying to hang on. Two of them. Hey, Shay, you all right? Another boy's just been hurt. He's hanging onto the tail with both arms. Hey, tell him to smile while they stick a guy in the trail. There's one Marine lying on his back with blood pouring out of him into the water. Hey, spread out! Spread out! There go the corpsmen are walking around. They don't seem to be taking any cover. They're walking upright, looking for casualties, moving from one guy to the next. One of our own boys has just been shot in the side. Oh, a little shot just hit in the water, missed a man by about 6 inches. Here comes the Tommy gunner in. He looks kind of out of breath. His teeth are gritted. He's walking straight towards us, standing up. Nothing hits him. And finally, he just sits down behind us, right behind us, and says, "Oh, seems to me that casualties are light." So every time you see one, it's not, it just makes you feel that there shouldn't be any at all. There goes the amphibian tractors are going...
By early August, at the cost of more than 1,000 American lives, Guam was declared secure. And villagers sang openly a song they had sung only when the Japanese weren't listening. Oh, Uncle Sam, our dear old Uncle Sam, won't you please come back to Guam?
General Douglas MacArthur could hear a similar song calling him to the Philippines. MacArthur, who shared command of the Pacific War with Admiral Chester Nimitz, was dismayed when the Joint Chiefs of Staff decided not to invade the Philippines. The Joint Chiefs reasoned that once Japan was defeated, the islands would fall on their own. But at a meeting with President Roosevelt in Hawaii in late July, the general insisted that the American people would be outraged and American honor discredited if he did not make good on his promise to return. MacArthur had already gone public with these complaints, and Republicans even talked about the general as a presidential candidate. FDR and the Joint Chiefs gave in.
In case you tuned in late, ladies and gentlemen, we are standing by for late news on the invasion of the Philippines. And in the meantime, we are presenting from San Francisco music by George Wright at the organ.
A few moments ago, we heard on our monitoring system the word that we could release a flash that the Philippines actually have been invaded.
On October 20th, a landing was made on Leyte in the Philippines, and General MacArthur went ashore to announce his pledge fulfilled.
I have returned. We have fought, dedicated and committed to the task.
What followed was the biggest naval battle in history, involving 2 American fleets and just about all that was left of Japan's Navy. 4 days of separate engagements, ranging over 500,000 square miles of ocean, ended with an American victory at Leyte Gulf, a victory made possible by the valor of the men of the 7th Fleet under Admiral Kinkaid, whose wild and improvised attacks routed what seemed to be a superior force. A victory paid for with some 3,000 American lives, added to the 3,000 lives spent in taking Peleliu Island the month before. A victory to satisfy the emotions of retribution and the ironies of history. For numbered among Kinkaid's warships were the battleships California, Tennessee, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and West Virginia. All raised from the mud of Pearl Harbor.
We'll return to the home front in a moment.
Bells were ringing tonight in Paris, in a liberated Paris, a Paris that for the first time since 1940 is free from oppression.
Down the Champs-Élysées on my left,
just beginning to get into the junction of the Champs-Élysées and the Place de la Concorde.
On August 25th, Allied forces, spearheaded by General Jacques Leclerc and the French 2nd Armored Division, rumbled into Paris to find that the capital was already controlled by the resistance. And the next day, under a brilliant late summer sky, almost the whole of Paris turned out to welcome a man who had proclaimed himself leader of the resistance. A man who now proclaimed himself leader of France.
And General de Gaulle, walking down the Champs-Élysées, entering the Place de la Concorde now.
The bells of Notre Dame and 100 other churches thundered. Flowers cascaded from balconies amid shouts of Vive la France. People swarmed into the streets and embraced one another. To the south, in Bordeaux, the collaborationist Vichy regime simply ceased to exist. And at Avignon on Liberation Day, crowds gathered by the 14th century Palace of the Popes to sing a song that had been outlawed for 4 years, the Marseillaise. And now, the Wehrmacht was in retreat. Out of France, through Alsace and Lorraine, into Belgium and Flanders fields, past the stone monuments that marked the horrors of World War I, retreat, across the Marne and the Meuse, into those wooded mountains from which the first massive westward assault of World War II had been launched just 4 years ago. There, in the Ardennes forest, as 1944 drew to a close, the climactic battle of the unquiet Western Front unfolded.
This was Hitler's plan. Attack the thin Allied line on the Belgian frontier, isolate the British in the north from the Americans in the south, strike a few heavy blows, and watch the artificial alliance between the feuding Allied generals collapse. On December 16th, 2,000 guns in the Ardennes open up. 28 divisions cut into Belgium in more than a dozen spearheads, one of them aimed at Bastogne, a crossroads defended by the 101st Airborne. The Allied line breaks with a great panzer bulge through the center. Bastogne is surrounded. The pounding continues. Food and ammunition are almost gone. There is no relief from the cold or from the clouds that keep transports and fighters grounded. December 22nd is recalled by the 101st's acting commander, General Anthony McAuliffe.
On the 22nd, the German commander, ridiculously enough, demanded surrender of the surrounded town. I just replied, nuts, for I knew that one word best expressed the feelings of the division.
As McAuliffe's men cursed the enemy, the weather, and their own predicament, the miracle they need happens. On the 23rd, the clouds vanish, and the sky over Bastogne is filled with planes from England, dropping supplies and bombing the German positions around the clock. Word comes that General Patton's armor is on the way.
On December 26, at 5 p.m., we made contact with friendly troops. Through it all, no one doubted for an instant that we would hold the town under any sort of attack the Germans could put on.
The German spearheads were cut off, the bulge flattened. Hitler's last desperate gamble was lost to a light beyond any commander's control. December 23rd's sunny day and midnight clear.
Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt spent Christmas 1944 at the White House. Only once since his election in 1932 had the president managed to have his Christmas at home in Hyde Park. That was the year before, in '43. His family was there, including 7 of the 14 Roosevelt grandchildren. He carved the turkey and, as always, read aloud from Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Eleanor noticed a special quality and liveliness in his voice. But this year, in '44, there was time only for a brief visit to Hyde Park to rest and to await the election returns that would send him back to the White House for a 4th term. The train that carried Eleanor and Franklin back to the Capitol departed from Hyde Park very early in the darkness, long hours before sunrise. Earlier in the year, before the political conventions, Roosevelt had written the Democratic Party chairman saying, "For myself, I do not want to run. All that is in me cries out to go back home on the Hudson River. That phrase, all that is in me, gave expression to a kind of fateful call. The old Roosevelt family home where FDR had grown up appealed to some basic instinct in the man. It found expression, too, in one of the president's favorite songs, a grand old spiritual, Going Home. The train pulled into Washington at 7:30 in the morning. It was a gray, rainy day. From the window of his coach, the president could feel the heavy quiet that enveloped the Capitol, whose broad streets were luminous and almost empty. He was told that there would no doubt be a crowd at the station to welcome him. There was. 30,000 people had gathered in the square outside Union Station with their dark, wet umbrellas reflecting the chill gray sky. They shouted their greetings, and the applause and cheers gathered from the square and echoed up the route to the White House, where 300,000 people stood in the rain to welcome home the chief. FDR's expression and his whole demeanor changed. He had the driver leave the top down on the convertible Packard, and soon the presidential party was soaked to the skin. Truman and Wallace, riding with the president, noticed something. He was euphoric. And Eleanor saw it too, the bond between this president and this people.
He reacted exactly as he always did react. He enjoyed going out and meeting the people, and their enthusiasm for him and his feeling of being at one with them seemed to give him an amount of exhilaration and energy and strength that nothing else did.
A word about our next program on the home front in a moment. "1945, the year of radio bulletins, one quickly followed by another. The conference at Yalta and the bridge at Remagen. The flag raising on Iwo Jima and the kamikaze attacks on Okinawa. A house in Warm Springs and a bunker in Berlin. The fall of Berlin and the surrender at Reims. The truth about the death camps and the judgment at Nuremberg. The flight of the Enola Gay and a ceremony on the battleship Missouri. A long night of barbarism ends and a Cold War begins. 1945, next on the home front. For Edward Brown and Frank Goren, this is William B. Williams. So long, world.